Welcome to How Positive Are You, a podcast series that looks at HIV and AIDS factually, fearlessly, and without the usual propaganda. I'm co-host Elizabeth Ely. We taped today's podcast on October 2nd, 2013, about a month after the death of heavyweight boxer Tommy Morrison at the age of 44. My guest is his widow, Trisha Harding Morrison. Tommy was a two-time heavyweight champion of the world, but you might remember him better as the character Tommy Gunn in the 1990 film Rocky V. The Nevada State Athletic Commission suspended him from boxing after testing allegedly HIV-positive in Las Vegas in February 1996. This was at the height of his career. This was sometime before a scheduled bout with Mike Tyson, to be Tyson's first after his prison term. After Tommy's death on September 1st of this year, most mainstream media outlets, including the New York Times, reported accurately that the family had not at that time disclosed the cause of death. Nonetheless, other media, mostly blogs, exploited the opportunity to spread rumors that Tommy died of so-called AIDS. For instance, Paz Magazine's blog predictably came out with reports implying strongly that Tommy died of HIV-related causes. In one instance, in a blog post featuring a silent film actress posing dramatically with a hand on her heart and an incredulous headline, "Tommy Morrison dead from AIDS?" Let's run that question once more without the sarcasm, but with some credible science, shall we? New electron microscopy analysis of Tommy's blood taken moments before he expired were released to Trisha by the University of Nebraska Medical Center on September 24th. That report showed no evidence of HIV in Tommy's blood. That's not surprising, as a previous electron microscopy analysis completed in July 2012 also showed the same result. No HIV, no AIDS. We're going to try to link those results on our website because they're important historical and scientific documents. In part one of this series, Trisha told us the full Tommy Morrison story against any rumors that Tommy supposedly died of AIDS. Just personally, I was deeply troubled by what I heard, the persistent legal harassment, horrible medical blunders, and blatant disregard for the truth in the media, and I encourage you to listen to part one if you haven't already. I was also moved by the courage of the Morrisons in holding on against all odds. We thought it would be helpful to consider separately the evidence against that diagnosis itself in the part two that you're about to hear. As in part one, I'd like to acknowledge science and biomedical consultant Andrew Maniotis, Ph.D., for his background on the science of the diagnosis of Tommy and his detailed timeline of events. In his former work as a research associate professor of bioengineering in the Department of Pathology at the University of Illinois, Chicago, Dr. Maniotis directed research into the cell and developmental biology of cancer. He was also a close friend of Tommy's, and he helped arrange for these important electron microscopy images. Also, as in part one, I would like to caution our listeners that even though these podcasts are apparently the first comprehensive stories of what really happened in the Tommy Morrison case, they do not constitute a full investigation of Tommy's death. Only investigative reporters could do that, seeking other witnesses to independently verify this information, and I'm just going to ask Trisha what she recalls and has documented. Hopefully an investigative reporter will take up this topic soon to correct the historical record as we did in part one and look into the science of Tommy's being or not being HIV positive. At the very least, the media have a lot to answer for in their sloppy handling of the terms HIV positive, HIV infected, and died of AIDS. Our usual host, Rethinking AIDS President David Crow, will not be participating today, but has sent his questions and suggestions. Welcome, Trisha.
Hi there.
Well, you've been very busy lately. A lot of emails to document things, just keeping track of everything that's being said about Tommy.
Yep. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, a lot of rumbling. The next really media frenzy will be when his family have their little family memorial service. for him. I think it's around October or 12th or 13th.
And of course, we know so far that the family does not share your views on his misdiagnosis.
Right, that's right. Yeah, in fact, they're pretty brutal about it. Just to give you an idea, the headstone that his mom has planned says, "In memory of a loving son, brother, and father," and that's it.
Before we proceed, I'd like to give our listeners a short biography of you. Trisha Harding was a former pro tennis player and coach from Great Britain. She met Tommy Morrison in 2009 while she was working as a VIP customer relations representative at a hotel in Wichita, Kansas. This was where two-time heavyweight boxing champion Tommy Morrison was a guest. Coincidentally, one of his scheduled flights in 1996 had caused her no end of frustration as boxing fans booked all the hotel rooms in Las Vegas, complicating her job finding places for British tourists. This was one of the 3 fights Tommy had been under that fateful contract for, the last of which was to be with Mike Tyson, and that last fight had to be canceled after Tommy's February 1996 so-called HIV test came up allegedly, quote, positive, unquote. By 2009, Trisha's Google search on her famous hotel guest turned up all kinds of sordid rumors, including that so-called HIV test. Nonetheless, as part of her job taking care of VIPs, she accompanied Tommy to the Wichita premiere of the AIDS documentary House of Numbers because the film mentioned him. Up to that time, Tommy had dismissed his own diagnosis, but he had not actually known that a whole community of like-minded people agreed with him on just how inexplicable and downright fraudulent his HIV test and everybody else's really was. So the information came as quite a shock. Tommy's experience and the viewing of the film set both of them off onto some research into the science, and they explored this together. Tommy and Trisha eventually married in May 2011. How Positive Are You last heard from Tommy Morrison when David Crow, Celia Farber, and Terry Michael interviewed him in 2010. Check our website at www.howpositiveareyou for a link to this previous podcast. After Tommy's death, Trisha, there were some vague allegations that his body was cremated immediately without an autopsy, implying that you were trying to hide something. Can you tell us what happened with the body and comment on those allegations?
I was just carrying out his wishes. You know, he certainly wasn't being hidden, just following the normal hospital procedure when somebody passes away. The social worker there at the hospital actually helped me. So while I was dealing with everything on the hospital side, there's a lot of family stuff going on, and I'm basically just telling them how it is, you know, how Tommy wanted it, and that was it. We had gone to Joe Frazier's funeral. We'd driven 12 hours each way. We got there, we stayed there for about 15 minutes, and then left to come back home again. Joe Frazier was another boxer. And Tommy looked at me and he said, you know, this is horrible. You know, the media were there, and he said, you know, let's get away from the media. You know, he didn't want to be the center of attention, and he didn't want that kind of event. So no, he didn't get cremated immediately. You know, there's a process that you have to go through, the paperwork and meeting with the right people, and the payment as well. And then the friction, and so that's it. You know, I switched off and started to do the stuff that he wanted, which was cremation. Yeah. So you meet with the people up there in Nebraska, and you know, you have to sign the paperwork, and of course, sign here. Cremation is irreversible. And I looked at them and I said, "You don't know Tommy Morrison, right?"
He's going to come back even in death.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, what about the allegations that you didn't order an autopsy?
When he died, I said, I need his blood drawn now. That is my autopsy to find out. I want you to look for the virus in his blood. That's my autopsy.
So they took blood immediately before he died, while he was still alive?
You know what? They took blood. They always took blood. One of the things that when you go into cardiac arrest and everything, they take blood and they test it. And then I had them do also additional blood in the purple tubing to run these specific tests. I had learnt that from Andy, and I basically told them what they had to do.
Okay, Andy being Dr. Andy Maniotis, who wanted to run an electron microscopy analysis of that blood.
Yeah.
Yes, that has happened recently that we got the results of that, and we'll get to that later. Uh, what does the death certificate list as the causes of death, and do you agree with those?
Didn't get the death certificate until about 5 days later. It has to be signed by the attending doctor, who was a very good doctor, and they listed four causes of death on there, and the top line was cardiac arrest, 41 minutes before death, and then they listed septic shock, 24 hours prior, and then they listed multi-organ failure, 24 hours prior, and then the last diagnosis was pseudomonas, aerugea, whatever it's called, septicemia.
It's an infection common in hospital patients, pseudomonas.
Yeah, and it's an infection that's very common in wounds.
As we discussed in part one, there was a wound that had failed to heal prior to this in his right chest, I believe. And so that would lay to rest any rumors that that was a complication of so-called AIDS. So basically, we're saying that none of these conditions are really likely AIDS-related conditions.
None. None at all.
This is breaking news to many of our listeners that what you've called the blood autopsy came out negative. That is, negative for any particles resembling HIV using an electron microscope at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, which we found out was one of the leading AIDS research facilities in the country. So this was on blood taken moments before Tommy died at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And apparently there was some delay in finding out these results. It took you almost all month to find them out, but find them out you did. So they reported it to you verbally on September 18th, and that led to some concerns that they would not release the report itself and divulge their methodology, which was very, very important to Dr. Maniotis. But they did release that report signed by a Dr. Hinrichs on September 24th. Is this report complete, adequate in its methodology, and precisely what you and Dr. Maniotis need to clear Tommy of any allegations of HIV infection?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to realize, Beth, that we ended up, for some reason, at one of the best hospitals and research centers for so-called HIV in the nation, right? And that was not our intention, but we ended up there, and the actual pathologist um, dated back to the 80s and quite openly said to me that he was one of the first to see the virus under the EM. So we couldn't have had a better team, right? And the results that have come through, yes, it took like pulling teeth. And it's because they know that what they did actually confirmed that Tommy had no virus in him. And what they sent me, I sent worldwide, and to me, that's internationally peer reviewed and confirmed that, yeah, that's a legitimate test. And the final diagnosis was no viral particles, and it even mentions no budding in there, all that terminology that I don't understand, but got confirmed by Andy and several other scientists and doctors all over the world that those results are true, done by the best people in the country.
There was also a previous attempt to get such results this past summer, and that blood vial mysteriously disappeared, right?
This was in June, and we had just really arrived at that hospital end of May. And I think that they thought that they could intimidate me and, do half the job, and I'd forget the rest because I was with Tommy 24 hours a day, doing everything with him and for him. And I think that they thought that I would just forget about it. But I pursued it. I asked the nurses, I asked the staff nurses, everybody, hey, where's that second vial of blood? Where did that go? And nobody could answer me. There's a department in the hospital, if you all want to remember this, that's in charge of the family that's got a patient in there. And they work for you. So I made this gentleman work for me. I said, go find the vial of blood, find out why the test wasn't done. And I just kept on at them every single day for 2.5 months.
Did that turn up?
No, it didn't. And the last thing I said to them was, you have a huge HIV research area and you've lost a vial of blood that's got all this viral load in it. What do you think? Do you think the CDC are going to be interested in this?
It's very crucial that we make a distinction between so-called viral load and finding virus under an electron microscope. Viral load is a label for something that finds bits of RNA and multiplies that RNA and purports to count it based on a ratio against a known quantity. But electron microscopy results, that was the second vial of blood that you had submitted, and that's the part that disappeared. The viral load results came back just fine, correct?
That's right.
Yeah, they had no trouble doing that.
Right, yeah. And the thing is, they actually even did that test in their own lab as well, because I have the printout of the results, and it is an in-house test. And that's what made me tell the infectious disease doctor, you are running a test in-house by a company called Roche that says this test does not detect or diagnose HIV infection.
You actually got an email from Roche Diagnostics Corporation shortly before Tommy died, correct? Saying that you are correct that this does not diagnose a disease, this our viral load test.
Correct, yeah. A week before he died, just out of the blue, on my BlackBerry phone in the hospital room, I get this email from Roche Products confirming their test did not diagnose or detect HIV infection. In fact, you have to already have had a test that says you're infected before you can even use that one. And it just came out of the blue, Beth. It was just sent down from heaven into our room, and that made me fight even harder.
A year earlier, however, Dr. Maniotis, Andy Maniotis, had succeeded in sending Tommy's blood out to the electron microscopy lab at, I believe, Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And you got those results around the 4th of July, 2012. This was a year earlier. What were they?
Yeah, that also came back with no viral particles in it.
Okay, so now we have repetition, which is a very important concept in science, saying, okay, wonderful that you got one result, but we need to see that duplicated. And I think that Dr. Maniotis was very, very mindful of that and very thrilled. The electron microscope image of Tommy's blood showed non-viable virus. And I don't understand too much about this, but he said it had to have a molecular signature with capsid and matrix, and that these were not in that sample. And these are components necessary for a virus to infiltrate cells and hijack their genetic material in order to proliferate. That's what viruses need. He also demonstrated more widely, not just in Tommy's case, on several other patients, that at many different so-called viral loads, in Tommy as well as these other people, electron microscopy still failed to find the actual presence of particles resembling HIV. It just is a really, really important test result, because it's not just a famous boxer. It's an important scientific finding that nobody is HIV positive even with viral loads in the millions. That to actually find virus, not antibodies, not pieces of RNA, is something that just doesn't happen with anybody.
Right, that's right.
What are the implications of this finding?
Well, we need to start using this finding. It's very clear we had it done twice, right? So whoever out there is wanting to find out if they've got a virus in their blood, all you need to do now is just say, take my, send it to either Boston or UNMC to photograph it, to let me know before I start taking any medications. It's as simple as that. If it's been done, then you now have an example, and that's what Tommy was all about. He knew he had a higher purpose, and it wasn't just boxing. He always would say, I've got the platform now. People are going to start to see what I'm doing and will use it. And of course, you've got the other people that, don't want to use it and blame him for stuff, but this is science. It's been scientifically proven. This is historic.
I just hope that others will be given access to this electron microscopy technology without some roadblocks on it, because we've already seen at least one person running an electron microscopy lab being harassed by the government, which constitutes witness tampering because it was connected with 2 criminal cases. And, we're finding these excuses popularly given that it's not an FDA-approved diagnostic procedure. Well, if taking a picture of the blood and seeing if you find virus there is not FDA approved, I don't know what you have to do to get FDA approval for something, or if FDA approval is completely irrelevant to this case. So I'm wondering what the guardians of AIDS knowledge are going to say about these test results. I mean, that the fact that Tommy took ARVs at 3 different times in his life resulted in that mysterious functional cure they're trying to push. The Mississippi AIDS cure baby and a few guys in France or something, on the allegation that they had quick, early, brief use of ARVs, that somehow killed it off. And David Crow, one of his inputs to this interview was, he said that that's quite a different song and dance than their earlier song and dance about how if you go off the drugs at any point, the virus mutates and you're finished. So, consistency has never been their strong point, but it's never really held them back either.
Right, yeah. He took them on 3 occasions that he told me about. One was in jail in the year 2000, and there he was given a selection of, whatever color you want to take, right? So whether he ended up putting them down his throat or not, I don't know. The next city that he was made to take them was in Phoenix, and we don't know for sure whether it had something to do with his promoter manager there having been paid off by the pharmaceutical company. But that was the next point there, and I don't think he took him for long. And then I believe he took them in LA, and again for maybe a couple of weeks there, just from looking at medical records. So those would be the 3 areas. Now, during my time, the only time that he was made to take them was in the ICU in the hospital in Lincoln, Nebraska. And Tommy had a G tube, a feeding tube in his stomach, because his throat was paralyzed from Miller Fisher Guillain-Barre. But he was prescribed these ARVs that, in fact, you can't put down a G tube. Did you know that?
No.
You can't. There's no IV ARVs, and I'm sure whoever's listening now is going to start to go and produce an IV form of ARVs. And there's no proper ARVs that can go down a G tube.
That's news to me, because part of the orphan scandal in New York City a decade ago was they were putting G tubes in these kids to get the drugs into them. And indeed, that's what's happening right now with baby Rico, Lindsay Nagel's son, in Minnesota, that they're providing this through G tube with really disastrous results to his health.
they don't work, because I tell you why, especially when you just mentioned, oh, he got cured with ARVs. Well, they actually did a blood test on him, because they thought I wasn't administering the ARVs to him. And they did a blood test on him to find out how much potency of the Truvada and the Sestiva, which is what they were giving him, right? And they found out that it had hardly anything in his blood system from those two drugs. And the pharmacist at the rehab place looked up one of those drugs and said, well, you can't use that in a G-tube anyway. So, here you've got ID doctors prescribing ARVs to be put down a G-tube, and they're not even being absorbed by the body.
The point is that, he really didn't take ARVs for any significant periods of time where they can just claim, see, this proves the opposite, that we cured AIDS in Tommy Morrison by these drugs. That his taking of them was not consistent enough to prove anything. But let's go back to the beginning. So back in February 1996, when he was originally so-called diagnosed or just indeed tested as part of his complete physical in Las Vegas, did he take further tests around that time? And how did those go? Was it just that one test in Las Vegas?
It was just that one test in Las Vegas, and that was it. Then he was flown out immediately out of Las Vegas.
I thought I had heard something about a subsequent test in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that also came out positive, allegedly. I don't know if you've ever seen the results of that one, and that there was also some kind of contact with Dr. David Ho shortly after that. So, but it was based on that one test that he got thrown out of boxing. Going back to that Las Vegas test, was there any documentation at all of that test that you were able to get a hold of?
Actually, after about a year of getting in contact with Quest Labs in Vegas, Quest Labs legal department miraculously retrieved results that had Tommy Morrison's name on there, but didn't have social security number, didn't have his date of birth, and had him down as aged 99 years old.
And this was not immediately after the test. This was some years later.
Yeah, I mean, he had been trying for years to get it. You're talking about maybe 15 years later, we get a copy, and it's not even a legitimate copy. And the doctor himself in Vegas didn't have a copy of the results in his file.
And you did talk to that doctor, correct?
Yeah, I did, on email.
Okay. This was the one who performed the original complete physical on Tommy in 1996 before a scheduled fight?
Yes.
Okay. So what did he have to say for himself?
Well, on email, he basically gave his condolences and, said he had never actually diagnosed him with HIV. And that was basically it. And I did question him on email, about the tests and, did he diagnose test results when they came back from the lab? And he basically said no, he's not a virologist, and he was not the one that disqualified Tommy from the fight.
And you didn't have a name of another doctor who did that?
No.
People may believe that an HIV test literally diagnoses a person as HIV positive. But what they don't know is that it takes a doctor to interpret those results, and it should be in conjunction with a lot of things, say perhaps symptoms, not necessarily symptoms, but certainly risk groups and things like that are taken into account. And I believe this doctor confirmed that as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that a test result is not a diagnosis. It's also, a test result isn't an on-off switch. It isn't a positive or negative. It's various bands and various numbers along a continuum. So you sort of add it up and say, well, I think this constitutes positive. And that equation may be different than, say, in Australia or Canada or places where you would be considered negative instead of positive. So it's not even standardized across borders. People should understand that. But the Nevada State Athletic Commission doesn't require a diagnosis at all. It's just a test result to ban a boxer. So it didn't even call on this doctor to make a diagnosis anyway.
It's getting more and more interesting every day because I'm finding out things. So it just wasn't done properly. And I think what happened in 96 with Tommy is still happening to this day. They're using the same test, they're using the same doctor, the same lab. Nobody knows how to look at the test results. And basically the commission is getting a piece of paper that says positive on there, but positive for what? You know, nobody's actually said what they're positive for.
Right. They're positive for a concentration of certain proteins in their blood that is arbitrarily considered high. But what that means is certainly not defined and certainly not attested to in the product warning inserts on these tests. So they protect themselves along the back side, but along the front side, they're telling you you're going to die or you need to be banned from boxing. And indeed, you forwarded an article about other boxers who have been banned from boxing. There must have been 10 or 11 of them on that list. And one as recently as December 2012, a boxer in Thailand, based on those tests, I assume in Las Vegas. And we have no real monitoring of whether these people got sick, whether they died of AIDS-related conditions, supposedly. It seems like Tommy's not the only one. There are several boxers who have been disqualified, and I wonder about the circumstances of that disqualification.
It's a pretty interesting sport.
And on top of that, they can't really prove in any way, and in fact that story didn't say in any way, that these people picked up supposed HIV from fighting other people who had it.
Right.
Yeah. In fact, I have a really nice quote here from Tommy that we thought was pretty funny at the time. He said in his own inimitable way, quote, "You have a better chance of growing an asshole on your forehead than getting HIV at a boxing event or any event."
You know, that's funny. I can hear him saying that now.
An expression that he used a lot.
All the time, yeah.
I mean, just going back to that original test, there's a lot of suspicious circumstances around it, and indeed things suspicious about the test itself. Didn't he say to us in 2010 that it was only just an ELISA test, not an ELISA and 2 Western blots as required, or something strange like that?
What came back on that report was an ELISA 1, ELISA 2, and a Western blot.
And also, by definition and standard protocol, these so-called HIV tests, the antibody type tests, the ELISA, the Western blot, they're intended only to diagnose people in risk groups, such as IV drug users, not healthy prize fighters. I mean, was Tommy ever informed of that fact, or did he ever bring it up himself?
No, it's on the application form when you apply for a license. And in 96, they had just brought in that rule that, you cannot have the virus, right, to fight in the ring. But then if you went to another state, out of all the boxing states, there were maybe about 2 or 3 states that required those particular HIV tests, and the others didn't. So it just didn't make sense.
There's also an issue of confounding factors. There are a number of confounding factors, at least 80, and at last count more than 100. We will link to the review of these on our website. Basically, minor illnesses that Tommy might have had, including a chronic sinus infection and related respiratory issues, and possibly steroid use. He did admit to using steroids. He did, yes, but possibly that steroids might confound the results. But these are, as far as Dr. Maniotis knows, not yet studied. So there could have even been that muddying the results, and that could muddy the results of a lot of other people. I think people should be informed of this.
Yeah, and they're definitely not. I mean, other related things that could trigger a false positive. It's certainly not the virus, as we've just found out, right?
Right.
But one of the things that I remember him telling Andy Maniotis is, the sinusitis that he had, and using the nasal spray. He used that every time for fighting. He had mono, he had EBV, Epstein-Barr, toenail fungus, some of those things that we've spoken to other people that have triggered a positive result on a so-called HIV test. It's not HIV virus, that's for sure.
Okay, and some of those inhalers are sort of corticosteroids as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And all HIV antibody test results, people should know this. The ELISA and the Western blot, and even possibly those quick tests that are even worse. They're suspect by definition because, by the logic of immunology, the presence of antibodies indicates an immunity to infectious diseases that they indicate, not the infections themselves.
whose antibodies are they?
So really the only way to check this out is through an electron microscope. All the tests have disclaimers. The scientists no longer claim that the Western blot is reliable, and a so-called fibrosis of the lymph node predicts progression to so-called AIDS by a far more statistically significant margin than CD4 counts in these strange viral load measurements do, according to Dr. Maniotis. So I just thought I would quote that from his paper about Tommy, and about other people. So really, on all sides, these tests are just assailable. I mean, this should be the beginning of a products liability nightmare for these companies.
Those test companies say it themselves. We don't detect or diagnose HIV. Period.
Okay, so if you believed us, don't sue us.
That's right.
We're immune from lawsuits, but you're immune from nothing because as soon as you go into a hospital and refuse to be treated for this condition that we don't take responsibility for, you will be said to be in denial.
Right.
So was Tommy the kind of person to go into denial about things?
No, he
Okay.
was not. Very smart. He could talk about anything. He was very strong. Not a denialist at all. If you
Not
didn't
look
believe,
not looking for the happy story that would get him out of this.
no,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. Was he the kind of person to, as various media have implied, look up crackpot conspiracy theories on the internet? And I think his mother probably said that about him. And without any critical thinking at all, base important life decisions on these things.
No, not at all. He would just a real down to earth guy. And, whether this whole HIV thing was a conspiracy in his eyes, he might have used the word conspiracy. Something strange went on, but he certainly wasn't a crackpot. And even I'm being called a crackpot. I was told to get off my crack pipe the other day, right? And I don't even know what a crack pipe looks like.
Who
So,
said that? On what was this one of these nasty blogs that are springing up
no,
all over the place?
no, you know what? Who did say that to me was the guy that would pray with Tommy in the ring before every match. Can you believe that? I mean, I was just so shocked. But you know what? We have scientific proof now. No longer denialists.
You told a story in part one about finding a book on his doorstep, and I think that would provide a little bit of context here about where he stood almost from the very beginning on this and how he seemed to get information when he needed it.
Well, you just got to remember he's just been kicked out of a sport, out of a $38.5 million contract, gets flown out of Vegas with Vegas full of people wanting to see him fight. And the next day, he was made to do a press conference in front of the world, literally the world, about his so-called HIV diagnosis. He does the press conference, and in his actual book, it said how much he hated being made to do that press conference, but he did it anyway. And then he drove home late at night, couldn't get any sleep, and he woke up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, gets up, makes a pot of coffee, goes and sits out on the porch, looks up into the stars, and really is shell-shocked to know what he's going to do with the rest of his life. When is he going to die? Is it going to be the next day or so? Then he looks down to his feet, right by the steps of his ranch, and there's a brown paper bag there. So he looks at the brown paper bag. There's nothing written on there. He picks it up, and inside is a book. There was a security gate there. There were dogs. He had no idea who left that book on his porch step.
Right.
He opened it up, and it was a book called Deadly Deceit.
Deadly Deception by Robert Wilner.
Deadly Deception, yeah. And he read it from front to back, and immediately he knew what this whole thing was about, and he carried on researching it from that day on.
I've seen it too often in this work that there's some kind of providence at work here, some kind of reassurance that the information will get through, that things will happen. Even the strange coincidence of Tommy landing for other reasons in one of the major HIV research hospitals in the country, and then having the electron microscopy results have to come out of that hospital.
And also, Beth, done by one of the pathologists that was there in the 80s that was doing EMs on the so-called virus.
Right. There are EMs of supposed HIV. Our listeners might be confused about that. Some of the images they've seen are not made up images, although the animations certainly are. And what they are things that are supposed to be HIV, supposed to be correlating with AIDS, and we have found do not. But these are what they're calling HIV. They have these images. So where are they getting those images is the next question. And where they're getting those are, they have to spike the blood. And they also have to get them from tissues that are, say, placental tissues where there might be a lot of endogenous, that is, native to the body retroviruses.
Right, yeah. I've never seen the virus. That's why we asked for his blood to be drawn. The only pictures of the virus I've ever seen are computer-generated, pretty colorful pictures. So I was eager to see those little, blobs and pokey hole things in his blood. So those were one vision of the virus that I thought we would be able to see in his blood if he did, in fact, have the HIV virus infection.
Well, I don't think that you'd see those colorful, animated, computer-generated pictures, but they do have legitimate electron microscopy images of something that Dr. Hinrichs and others have done, and they've called this HIV. The point is that they did not find anything of the sort, even resembling those pictures, in Tommy's blood.
Right, that's right. They didn't find anything at all.
Getting back to this idea of a conspiracy, I mean, not just against everybody, but against Tommy. We're looking at the circumstances in his boxing career at the time that he was diagnosed HIV positive, and I wonder further about these other boxers. There have been allegations by boxing fans that this was a crooked business. Can you describe what they might have meant by that?
He had just fired his manager that he had had since '88, so that could be one reason. And that manager actually has had a wonderful time.
He's had a wonderful past few weeks.
Really putting Tommy down and saying all the nasty things about him. So that could be one reason right there.
And he was saying things at the time?
That because he was no longer Tommy's manager, right, when it came to that 96 fight. So that could be a reason. Also, what Tommy kind of mentioned to me was on that application for the license to fight in Nevada, all you had to do was bring blood test results with you to Vegas. You didn't necessarily have to have them done in Vegas. And when he brought that up, he looked at me, he said, well, why was I made to do my test in Vegas?
There could have been some attempt to frame him up by doing some secret procedure that he wasn't allowed to see. There's also some allegations about what it might have meant to Mike Tyson's career had Tommy gone ahead with the fight, and how people sympathetic to Mike Tyson, I'm not saying Mike Tyson himself, but people sympathetic to his case might not have wanted to see Mike Tyson be the weaker one in that fight, as Mike Tyson was only recently released from prison.
Right. Yeah. There's some questions about that as well. The big promoter for those fights was actually there in '96, and he wasn't Tommy's promoter. He was a promoter for the other side. His name is Don King.
Has anyone protested the boxing authorities, and particularly those in Nevada, continuing to test boxers for supposed HIV antibodies? I mean, has anyone said anything about how nuts this is? Or even these other boxers who've been disqualified, I wonder what they say.
Well, I've said it, and obviously it's gonna take more than me, but we've got a good case here. What the commission wants to know, basically, and all the commissions in the country, is whether that boxer's got an infectious virus, right? And they've called it HIV. So who is it that's telling the commission, which is a government-owned, entity, who is it that's telling them you have to use these tests? Who? I mean, that's where we need to start. If you were to tell me, go speak to Joe Bloggs in New York and just let him know that these tests, don't detect what they are wanting to know, I'll do that. But, you don't know where to start on this.
Right, it's just too big. Tommy said to us in 2010, Vegas is a kind of hub in American boxing. What they say goes. So he had been asked a very important question, that why hadn't he retested in Las Vegas? And he said, well, no way was he going back there, because he would have to go quietly and without media present and make sure that things were verified so that there were no allegations of foul play. And that's what he told us in 2010. Did he ever try to test again in Las Vegas, even anonymously, as he described, after we last spoke with him in 2010?
No, you can't do anything anonymous with Tommy. Everybody knows him.
He started testing again around 2006 or 2007 because he was trying to do a comeback in boxing. He had said by 2010 he had had about 20 tests and they all came out negative. These are places other than Las Vegas. He had a weakly reactive Western blot among those. That was mid to late 2012. But it's important again to list these confounding factors, because by then Tommy had experienced a lot of health problems due to some incarcerations, some medical blunders, things like that we talked about in graphic detail in part one. I can't recommend part one enough. Anemia, various chronic fungal infections of the nasal cavity and feet, a prior hepatitis C diagnosis and treatment, and he was treated for 9 months with the highly immunotoxic medications alpha interferon and ribavirin. He had chronic use of prescribed Adderall for attention deficit disorder since 1997. This is a crystal meth-like drug, and crystal meth can also confound the HIV test. And he'd had various vaccines. So there were a lot of factors that could have thrown that test off, and still it was only weakly reactive. And it's important to note that Tommy himself offered up his 2 very valuable championship belts to anyone who could show actual HIV virus in his blood. To date, no one has claimed them, and the belts were instead stolen by, this is a strange story, a so-called Mr. Scala. He actually held them ransom and told Tommy that he had to admit the opposite, that he was supposedly HIV infected and gay.
Yeah.
That's just a really bizarre incident in all this. And there's other evidence of Tommy's HIV negativity. no HIV positive children, wives or girlfriends. He was married twice, no, maybe 3 times, including you.
Yep.
And 2 of these women, the ones before you, delivered 2 and possibly 3 still healthy sons by him.
Yeah.
Were they all born after 1996?
Well, they're 23. 2 boys are 23, and the younger one is 10. Those are the ages, right? All 3 boys.
So the one who's 23, I would assume, would be before then. So, but really, there's nobody in his intimate life who's claiming that they were HIV positive or they're claiming that they died of AIDS.
No.
I dug up a story about him going through a ridiculous sperm washing procedure to have children. I actually wrote an article about this in early 2007, and I looked it up. Basically, there was some company out of Boston touting this procedure whereby men who had tested HIV positive could still have children through in vitro fertilization of their partners if they sent their semen through a centrifuge and all these strange procedures to supposedly scrub it of its HIV particles, assuming they can even look at HIV particles in it. So, was there any truth to that? Did he ever talk about having gone through that procedure?
Yeah, he
Really?
did. Yep, and that's how they got that son, that 10-year-old son. And in fact, his ex-wife has been blogging on Facebook because obviously, I'm crazy, right? And well, I had to go through this sperm washing thing to have our son, and why would we have done that? And so she's trying to, confirm the other side, right?
Yes.
And,
Well, obviously, she went through a lot to have that child, so there's kind of an emotionalism going on here. But
but wait, Tommy had a vasectomy, right? So, that's got to come into play somewhere, right?
oh,
You know,
right. Okay, so that the only way that he could have a child was through IVF anyway.
probably, yeah. I mean, I would think so. Once you've had a vasectomy at a very early age, which is why he had to take testosterone, because his testosterone level was very low. But I remember Tommy saying, "Oh, after they washed the sperm the first time, everything was good." And they're supposedly supposed to wash it like 3 or 4 times.
Uh-huh.
I don't know the process, but yeah, he was involved in that too.
So, do you have any serious health issues, or have you ever been tested for HIV status?
Yeah, went tested in Hawaii, right? We did this little road trip, and nothing. I don't have one of the 80 to 100 ailments, thank goodness. I'm touching wood right now. So I probably will never, trigger off a false positive.
Right.
So yeah,
I guess it goes without saying that you had unprotected sex with your husband.
you bet. I mean, who has sex with their husband or wife with a condom anymore? I mean, come on. I tell them all. I say it in front of the media. I've got no problem with saying it.
Why should you apologize for having real sex with a real husband? It's amazing that we have to be having this discussion about whether Tommy died of AIDS, given all the other things that he went through. And I really see this as something that our audience might relate to because it's a dangerous possibility for all those who have tested HIV positive. And for me, a main reason to consider not getting tested at all. Because incompetent doctors can always blame HIV for any problems that you have, and they'll often refuse to diagnose or treat any other illness in you. This can cause problems down the line because if you're not actually treated for what you have, it will fester.
Yeah, I mean, every hospital we went to, every doctor's appointment you go to, oh, you've got to treat the underlying condition. Oh, you're only going to live for the next week, the next 3 months. So it gets very old. You've got to be very, very strong.
The elephant in the room is that he died of all these other things, and that it was really incompetent health care, and then trying to deal with that down the road with maybe some good doctors who tried their very best to heal him. But these things are not AIDS. He was healthy before his 1996 diagnosis. He won and defended 2 heavyweight championship belts in the years before the diagnosis, and we were talking one of the healthiest people in the whole world. And then after that diagnosis, I mean, these are the elephants in the room. Prescription Adderall for ADD, which is a methamphetamine-like drug, a hepatitis C diagnosis, and treatment with alpha interferon and ribavirin being extremely toxic, and a bout of pneumonia because of that, and the hepatitis C diagnosis itself being a little suspicious because he never had any symptoms of liver damage or liver toxicity. Vaccines that may have caused the Miller-Fisher Guillain-Barre syndromes that are documented to follow tetanus vaccines, which he did have. Medical neglect in jail. And last but not least, he took antiretroviral AIDS drugs, ARVs, at 3 different times as either forced or maybe consensual on one of those times. And he reported side effects to us of weakness, chronic diarrhea, and vomiting. I mean, what about this does not catch anyone's attention?
Right.
I believe our listeners should tune in to part 1 for the details of what Tommy went through beyond the medical blunders, especially the details that you give of his September 2011 3-week incarceration ordeal, being picked up on a supposed fugitive warrant in Kansas. He was picked up in Tennessee. And this leading eventually to his needing surgery on an infected chest wound and this pseudomonas infection that you spoke of. Did he have any of these infections at the time of his death?
He had the pseudomonas because he never got rid of that. That was in his system from the wound.
It just strikes me, if I can just get on my soapbox for a moment here, that I'm very impressed at how tirelessly you've been seeking answers, both before and after Tommy's death, on why these certain tests are supposed to mean things that their manufacturers don't even claim they mean. And then I get the sinking feeling that on some level it doesn't matter, that this is a conversation that bypasses any facts at all, and that if these people on the blogs are even real people and not internet shills, the conversation is all about Tommy's having been in some kind of denial, and it's a play based on doing the right or the wrong thing, and if you screw up, you die. It's exactly the little morality play that the gatekeepers of this celebrity and professional athlete endorsement business want us to believe. And the word that comes to mind is, it's fluffy. It's the new playing field on which these matters are selling and being settled. And that's depressing to me. And you have to wonder at the incredible maliciousness of these people in insisting that Tommy supposedly died of AIDS. I mean, at one point, Dr. Maniotis said hilariously, if you can't understand the research, just look at the pictures. Because honestly, the EM pictures show no virus. What more do they need? I mean, what do you think? Do you still believe that you can convince anyone by forcing embarrassing admissions from the grand poobahs of AIDS research and anyone involved in Tommy's just unaccountable, accountability-free zone of his so-called diagnosis? Are you even speaking on the same radio station as these people?
I'm asking the questions because I don't see the answers anywhere. And that's what other people should be asking. You know, we've discovered that the tests that are used, and it's real simple, and somebody just needs to put it up on somebody's website so everybody can see that the 3 tests that they are currently using do not detect a virus in someone's body. The only test, the gold standard, as everybody keeps calling it, that is the most traditional, 100% guaranteed, it can look for any virus in the blood and body. That's the only test, period. You know, if Abbott's and Roche and DuPont, who make the ELISA, Western blot, and viral load, if they want to carry on doing their tests, great. But, you know, if anybody wants to know whether they really have a virus, then have it done the way that they supposedly discovered the virus. You know, I'm not arguing with anybody. They can all carry on doing what they're doing, but if anybody says to you, you've got a virus in your body, just ask for an EM test.
The bottom line is, are you willing to bet your own life on the tests that that were mistakenly used to bring Tommy Morrison down? Or do you want the one that is now clearing his name?
You know, another thing too, I mean, the symptoms, you know, that they keep bringing up, and, you know, anybody out there that is listening, you know, he did turn to drugs between 96 and whatever after he got kicked out. And the reason why he was losing weight wasn't because he was dying of the so-called virus. He was on drugs. And, you know, so anybody that has a health issue, you know, don't go on drugs. And I told him that, and that's why the last 5 years in my realm, he didn't do drugs, and he got off drugs in the last 3 years completely.
So you're talking recreational drugs?
Yeah.
Right. But there were also some problems with prescription drugs. I mean, particularly these ones taken for so-called hepatitis C, which can make a person quite ill. So people should be suspicious of those. You need to do your homework. You need to get second opinions. You need to ask and research about these things.
That's correct. And you know what? I will carry on. I don't think I need to fight anymore. You know, he's resting in peace right now because we have the ultimate result. Now I'm getting it out there in the media to his fans. And of course, there's two sides. Oh, he got cured. Oh, you know, he never had it. You know, and then you'll get the other side of the party saying, why does she keep on, you know, telling us, you know, whether he had it or not? You know, I'll keep telling them, you know.
I assume that the reason you keep telling them is so that they will know that they can be protected against this kind of fraud if they look into things enough. That was the purpose that Tommy perceived for his life, was bringing the news to other people.
By his platform, yeah. But you have to do it in steps. You can't just do everything at one time, because otherwise people will think you're nuts. The first step is there is now a test that detects HIV virus in the system. Whether it exists or not, or anything like that, that's up to that person's thinking, right? Mm-hmm. But there is a test, a confirmatory gold test.
And that being electron microscopy.
And then they come back and ask you, well, what about the other tests that he had? Well, you know, the other tests actually don't diagnose HIV, sorry. And they go, what are you talking about? Well, just contact Abbott's, DuPont, and Roche yourselves. Don't even get involved in it, right? Just say contact them direct.
Right. You don't have to respond to people in the emergency room who are telling you you're crazy.
Right. Just contact those people direct.
Right. And as part of Tommy's platform, he has written one book already, and you worked with him on a second book, that we should mention it today as well, that will deal with the details of his diagnosis and just how wrong that was. And when will this book be published?
Well, I'm working on that right now. You know, it was supposed to be my darkest years from 96 to 2006, but I'm actually making it all the way to 2013. And in there has everything, diagnosis, the tests. I mean, that's where his platform is inside that book.
We will keep our listeners informed of when that will be coming out subsequent to this podcast. So if you have any further comments, I can take them now. Otherwise, we will wrap up. And I want to end after your comments with a clip from Tommy's How Positive Are You interview in February 2010 that will give his own view on his original alleged HIV positive test result. Is there anything else you'd like to tell our listeners?
Yeah, he's being labeled as the people's champ right now out there. You know, he fought in and out of the ring. He didn't die in vain. You know, I feel that he's been redeemed and exonerated now. I'm happy, and I know he's happy about that. And he always said that everything hidden in darkness and deceit will come to the light. And he certainly has brought that. And ultimately, as he always says, science trumps. and you can't argue with his amazing result that we knew was going to be negative all along. So don't forget him. You know, he's done this for a purpose, and you know, he's resting in peace.
And now, Tommy's own words from the How Positive Are You conducted in February 2010.
I thought it was all bullshit to start with. I mean, based on the information I was getting, you know, and there's, you know, a lot of under-the-table sort of information that goes on in this world. And based on what I was being led to believe by our government, that, yeah, the possibility existed a person maybe could get it in the ring. But then you do some research on that, and there's not a single documented case in the history of this planet of anyone ever getting in any sporting event, ever. I mean, it's impossible. It can't happen. It's never happened. There's reasons why it's never happened, because it's impossible.
This has been another episode of How Positive Are You? Thank you for joining us. If you found our message inspiring, please be inspired in turn to give us your thoughts and feedback at info@howpositiveareyou.com, donate funds large or small, and inquire about advertising appropriate products or services on our website. Until the next time, be well, and remember, relax. It's just information.